The starship Aurora's Edge drifted silently through the vast stretch of the Eridani expanse. Outside its reinforced observation windows, glittering stars scattered like diamonds across a velvet sky. It was beautiful, yet infinite emptiness always reminded the crew of their smallness. Humans had come far, carving out colonies and research stations in corners of space that no other species had dared to explore. Yet for all their technology, for all their intelligence, the crew sometimes felt unbearably alone. Captain Elena Marquez stood at the observation deck, hands resting lightly on the cold railing. Her eyes, a deep shade of amber, followed the path of a distant comet that left a pale trail behind it. The ship's hum was steady and comforting, a reminder of life in a place where nothing else breathed. She had been in command of the Aurora's Edge for 3 years now, and each mission reminded her of the human need to connect, to feel something beyond the routine of survival. "Captain?" A soft voice broke her reverie. She turned to see Lieutenant Cale Arden approaching, his steps measured, almost hesitant. Cale had always been quiet, observant, the kind of person who noticed what others ignored. He carried himself with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos that often surrounded space travel. Yet in his eyes there was a depth that intrigued Elena, a mixture of curiosity and something unspoken, something she felt but couldn't name. "Yes, Cal?" she asked, turning fully to face him. "There's a signal, a faint one, coming from the debris field near Kepler 47b, he said, holding up a small tablet. "It's unusual. The pattern doesn't match any known species or phenomena." Elena's interest peaked. Space was vast, but patterns were rare. Anything that didn't fit the expected could mean discovery or danger. "Show me," she said, gesturing for him to bring the tablet closer. Cale placed it gently on the railing between them. The holographic display shimmered, showing pulsing lines that twisted and coiled like living strands. "It's almost musical," Cale whispered, eyes fixed on the display. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if it's trying to communicate." Elena leaned closer, feeling the energy in the air shift. Humans were not the first to encounter the unknown. But there was something about this pattern that made her heart beat faster. It was subtle, the kind of excitement that lingered in the spaces between curiosity and fear. "Prepare a probe," she ordered. "We'll need to see this up close and—" "Kyle," she paused, noticing the way his gaze lingered on the display. "Stay with me on this one." Cale nodded, though he didn't speak. That was his way, careful, measured, leaving room for thought. Elena had always admired it, though it sometimes left her wanting words she never knew how to ask. Hours later, the Aurora's Edge hovered above the debris field. Fragmented pieces of a long-dead moon drifted lazily in the void, catching the ship's lights and scattering them across the blackness. The probe, small and sleek, descended slowly, transmitting live data back to the ship. Cale sat beside Elena in the observation room, fingers lightly brushing the edge of the console. "Look at this," he murmured. Images of crystalline structures half buried in asteroid rock appeared on the screen. They shimmered in colors that seemed impossible, shifting subtly as if alive. "Crystalline life?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Humans had always had a way of thriving where others wouldn't, adapting, surviving, sometimes even creating life. But this was beyond anything she'd seen. Cale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, his brow furrowed as he studied the display. Then softly he said, "It's beautiful. Almost like it's singing." Elena felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. Kyle rarely spoke of beauty. He was logic-driven, precise, careful with words. Yet now, in this quiet room, he spoke of wonder. And in that space between his words and his feelings, Elena felt a connection she couldn't define. They worked together in silence, running analyses, collecting data, deciphering patterns. The crystalline structures emitted pulses that seemed like language, but unlike any code humans had ever written. It wasn't aggressive or defensive, it was an invitation. Hours passed and the ship's lights dimmed as they continued their work. At one point, Cale reached for a tablet to cross-reference readings. Their hands brushed lightly. Elena's breath caught for a second, though neither of them acknowledged it. Humans had ways of communicating beyond speech, subtle gestures that revealed more than words ever could. And in that brief contact, a silent understanding passed between them. Curiosity, admiration, and something deeper, unspoken. Captain. Cale finally spoke, his voice almost hesitant. Do you think it's trying to reach out? Not just to us, but to communicate in a way that matters? Helena considered him, the way his eyes searched hers for an answer she hadn't yet found for herself. If it is, she said softly, we need to listen carefully. Humans have always found ways to connect with the unknown. Maybe we can understand it. Cale nodded, his usual calm giving way to a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was small, but Elena noticed. And in that moment she realized that the space between them, between what they said and what they felt, was alive with possibility. As the probe continued its descent, the patterns became more complex, forming intricate spirals and shapes that resembled constellations. Elena leaned close, tracing them with her finger on the holographic display. Kyle mirrored her movement, their fingers hovering close but not touching, the silence between them growing rich with unspoken emotion. Do you ever wonder, Kyle asked quietly, why humans keep reaching? Even when we know the universe is so vast, so full of things we might never understand? Elena looked at him, sensing the weight behind the question. Because we're alive, she said. Because we feel. Because the spaces between what we say and what we feel are where meaning lives. Cale's eyes softened. He looked at her, really looked, as if trying to see her entire being in a single moment. And for a heartbeat, the stars outside faded into insignificance. The probe landed softly on a crystalline fragment. A low hum filled the observation room, subtle yet resonant, vibrating in their bones. The light shifted, bathing the room in soft hues of violet and blue. It was more than a signal now. It felt like a presence. Elena's hand brushed against the console as she whispered, Cale, it's like it knows we're here. Cale leaned closer, their shoulders almost touching. Maybe it does, he said. Maybe it's waiting for us to understand it. Together. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the emptiness of space and the shimmer of alien crystals, something fragile began to bloom between them. Not a confession, not a declaration, just a shared awareness that connection, like the universe itself, could be found in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in what remained unspoken. The aurora's edge drifted above the debris, its lights reflecting on the crystalline structures below. Elena and Cale stood side by side, listening to the silent song of something alive and unknowable. In the vastness of the Eridani expanse, humans had found another mystery, but more importantly, they had begun to discover the spaces between themselves. And sometimes, in the infinite reaches of space, that was enough to spark the beginnings of something extraordinary. The aurora's edge floated above the crystalline debris, the hum of its engines a soft, constant companion. Days had passed since the initial discovery, and the signals from the crystalline structures had grown stronger, more intricate. Each pulse seemed deliberate, like the language of something alive waiting to be understood. Elena and Cale had spent countless hours analyzing the signals. Neither slept much, their minds consumed by the patterns and the faint sense of connection that seemed to grow stronger with each observation. They worked side by side in the observation deck, leaning close to screens, occasionally exchanging ideas or questions. Words were few, but in the silences between them, understanding and trust deepened. Cale's fingers moved deftly across a holographic interface, aligning signal pulses in a pattern he had discovered. Look at this, he said softly, not wanting to disturb the fragile calm in the room. The pulses aren't random. They repeat in sequences, almost like a story, or a song. Elena leaned over, her amber eyes reflecting the shifting colors of the holographic display. A story. Could it be telling us something? About itself or about what it wants from us? Cale hesitated. I don't know, but I feel it's curious, like it wants to be understood, not just observed. Elena nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Humans had always reached beyond themselves, seeking meaning in the unknown, and here in the silence of space, that drive felt more alive than ever. They continued decoding the sequences, their teamwork a silent dance of thought and intuition. It was in these quiet moments that Elena realized how much she had come to rely on Cale, not just for his intellect, but for the way he seemed to understand the world around them, the things left unsaid. She caught herself watching him from the corner of her eye, noticing the slight furrow of his brow when he concentrated, the way his lips pressed together when he thought deeply. Captain, Kale said suddenly, his voice breaking her thoughts. I think I found a pattern. A signal within the signal. It's almost like it's trying to mimic human emotion. Elena froze. Mimic emotion? Yes, Kale said, pointing to the display. Look at this segment. The pulses rise and fall in a rhythm that resembles human heartbeats. It accelerates, then slows. There are repetitions, pauses, almost like laughter or hesitation. Elena's breath caught. She had seen alien signals before, strange and complex, but never anything that seemed so intimately aware of the human experience. It's responding to us, she whispered. Kyle looked at her, his expression a mixture of excitement and wonder. Not just responding, maybe trying to connect. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of realization settling over them. Humans were special not because they had conquered planets or mastered technology, but because they felt. And here, across the emptiness of space, something else, something alien, was reaching out in the only way it could, by speaking in the language of the heart. That night, the observation deck was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of the ship's instruments and the alien crystals below. Elena leaned against the railing, staring at the distant pulses of light that shifted like breathing stars. Kale joined her, standing a fraction of an inch too close, yet not touching. Do you ever think, Elena began softly, that the universe understands us in ways we can't always explain? Kale considered her question carefully. I think it does, he said finally. Not like a person understands another person, but like the universe responds to us because we notice it. We care enough to look, to feel, to wonder. Elena turned to him, the soft light casting shadows across his face. I feel that, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And I feel it with you. Kale's eyes softened. He didn't speak immediately, but the tension between them eased as if the acknowledgement itself was enough. They stood together in silence, letting the moment settle around them like a fragile bubble. Fragile but alive. The next day, they deployed a small exploratory drone to land among the crystalline formations. Its lights glowed softly as it transmitted real-time footage of the structures. The crystals were delicate, refracting the drone's light into intricate patterns that danced across the asteroid surface. Look at that, Kale said, his voice tinged with awe. It's reacting to the drone, almost like it's aware. Elena studied the display. Aware, yes, but aware in a way that feels emotional, like it's trying to express something. They worked together, experimenting carefully. Kale suggested subtle vibrations, sending pulses through the crystals, while Elena adjusted the drone's light patterns. Slowly, the crystals responded, shifting in rhythm, creating shapes and colors that were almost poetic. It's beautiful, Elena whispered. Kale looked at her, and for the first time he allowed a small, genuine smile to appear. Yes, it is. They had begun to understand in part the alien presence. And in their collaboration, the spaces between them, the pauses, the shared glances, the quiet trust, grew richer, more meaningful. Words were no longer necessary. Days turned into a week, and the team on the Aurora's edge became attuned to the crystal's rhythms. They learned that each pulse corresponded to a form of communication: joy, curiosity, caution. Humans had always been adaptable, able to find patterns where others saw only chaos. And here, in the void, they had done it again. Kale and Elena spent long hours together, interpreting signals, refining the patterns, learning the subtle art of listening to something entirely alien. And as they did, their bond deepened. Small gestures, a hand lightly resting on a console near the others, a shared laugh, a lingering glance, spoke volumes in the spaces between words. One evening, as the Aurora's edge orbited the largest crystal cluster, a new sequence appeared. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a series of pulses that rose and fell like a heartbeat, then flattened into a steady rhythm. Elena recognized it immediately. It's trying to communicate a name, she said. Kale's eyes widened. A name? Yes, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. Not a human name, but it's identifying itself. It wants to be known. They transmitted a careful response, mimicking the rhythm and pulse. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the crystals shimmered brighter, their shapes forming intricate spirals that resembled a dance. It was acknowledgement, recognition, connection. Kale looked at Elena, his eyes filled with awe. We did it. We reached it. Elena smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the moment. Yeah, together. The significance of their achievement wasn't just scientific, it was profoundly human. They had touched the unknown, not with force or fear, but with curiosity, empathy, and understanding. And in doing so, they had discovered something that transcended words. A shared experience, a silent communion. Later, in the quiet of the observation deck, Elena turned to Cale. "You know," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship, "I think this is what humans are meant to do, to reach beyond ourselves, to connect, to understand, even when the universe seems impossibly vast." Cale nodded, stepping closer. "And to feel," he added, his gaze holding hers. For a long moment they stood together, the alien crystals below reflecting patterns of light across their faces. There was no rush, no need for words, no pressure to define what existed between them. It was enough to be present, to share the understanding, to let the silence carry their unspoken emotions. Elena felt a gentle warmth in her chest. In Cale's presence, in the quiet of the ship, in the endless stars beyond, she felt hope, connection, something deeper than friendship, something that could not be captured in speech alone. And Cale, standing beside her, felt the same. In the spaces between what they said and what they felt, a bond was forming, a bond as vast and intricate as the universe itself. As the Aurora's edge drifted above the crystalline cluster, the alien structures pulsed once more, bright and steady. It was a greeting, a promise, a shared acknowledgement that even in the endless void, understanding and even love could be found. And somewhere deep inside, both Elena and Cale knew this was only the beginning. The Aurora's edge continued to orbit the crystalline cluster, now fully attuned to the pulses and rhythms of the alien structures. Elena and Cale had spent days interpreting the signals, learning to mimic the patterns, and slowly, the crystals had begun to respond in increasingly complex ways. It was no longer just a song. They were witnessing a story, a history encoded in light and vibration. Elena stood at the observation deck, the vast expanse of space reflected in her eyes. The crystals below shimmered like a living mosaic, a silent orchestra performing for an audience of two. She felt an excitement she hadn't known in years, the same thrill that humans had felt when first touching the unknown, exploring the edges of what was thought impossible. Cale joined her, carrying 2 cups of nutrient-infused tea. He handed one to her with a small smile, a simple gesture that somehow felt intimate in the quiet. "Shared space. They've changed again," Cale said softly, pointing to the holographic projection of the crystals. "The pulses, they're more deliberate, almost like they're trying to communicate something important." Elena leaned closer. "Important, yes. But what could they want from us? And why now?" Cale's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. "Maybe they've been waiting for us to understand, not just to observe, but to feel." Elena's heart stirred. Cale's words always had a weight to them, carefully measured but infused with sincerity. She realized that she was beginning to depend on him not just for his insight, but for the quiet stability he brought, for the unspoken understanding that seemed to flow naturally between them. The following hours were filled with intricate work. Elena and Cale synchronized the ship's instruments with the crystal's pulse patterns. Each sequence they transmitted was met with an almost immediate response. Spirals of light shifted, pulses echoed, and a melody of vibrations filled the ship's hull. It was a language without words, yet the meaning was clear. The crystals wanted to share something, a memory, a message, a connection. Cale worked meticulously, adjusting the frequency of the pulses while Elena fine-tuned the projection interface. Occasionally their fingers brushed over the same console, a spark of warmth passing through them. They didn't speak of it, but in the spaces between words, a silent understanding continued to grow. Then a new pattern emerged, a rhythm that was startlingly familiar. It mimicked the steady cadence of human hearts, intertwined in subtle variations, almost like 2 beings moving together in sync. Elena's breath caught. "Kyle, it's our hearts," she whispered. Cale's eyes met hers, wide with astonishment. "It's reflecting us, not just human emotion in general. It's responding to us specifically." They stood side by side, hands resting lightly on the console. In that shared moment, they understood something profound. The crystals were more than a living structure. They were a bridge, a mirror of human curiosity and emotion, a reflection of what made them human, the ability to connect, to empathize, to care deeply. Days turned into nights, though in the vacuum of space, the concept of time seemed almost meaningless. Elena and Kyle's collaboration had deepened beyond the professional. Their subtle glances, the moments where they instinctively understood each other's thoughts, grew into a quiet intimacy, yet neither had spoken openly of their feelings, allowing the spaces between words to carry the weight of unspoken affection. One evening, Kyle approached Elena with a data tablet in hand. "Captain, I've traced a sequence that seems like a map," he said. "The crystals are showing us a path, but it's not physical. It's conceptual. A story, or perhaps a memory encoded in patterns." Elena leaned over, tracing the luminous lines with her finger. "A map of what?" Kyle hesitated, then said softly, "Of connection. Of understanding. I think they're teaching us how to feel something beyond ourselves, how to reach each other even in silence." Elena's eyes softened. The thought resonated deeply. Humans had always sought understanding, and here, across the void, they were learning not only from the unknown, but from each other. The alien intelligence wasn't just a mystery to solve, it was a teacher, showing them that the spaces between words, gestures, and glances could carry meaning greater than language. The final sequence began unexpectedly. The crystals pulsed in rapid succession, brighter than before, shifting into shapes that resembled intertwined strands. Elena and Kyle instinctively matched the pulse patterns, their own hearts beating faster in unison. The room seemed to hum with energy, the air vibrating with the resonance of life itself. "It's responding to us as a pair," Elena murmured, awestruck. Kyle nodded, his hand hovering near hers. "Not just us as individuals, but the connection between us. The spaces between what we say and what we feel." Elena took a deep breath. She reached out, letting her hand brush against Kyle's. The warmth that passed between them was gentle but undeniable. Words were unnecessary. In that touch, in the shared heartbeat of human and alien resonance, they understood each other completely. The crystals pulsed once more, a final, brilliant display of color and vibration. It felt like a message, simple yet profound: recognition, understanding, and the beauty of connection. Kyle's voice broke the momentary silence. "Elena, She placed a finger on his lips, smiling softly. "No words," she whispered. "Not now, just this," and in that quiet, shared presence they allowed themselves to simply feel. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself acknowledged the bond forming between them. Humans had always reached for the unknown, and in doing so, they had discovered something extraordinary, not just alien intelligence, but the depth of their own humanity, and the subtle power of connection that had always existed between them. In the days that followed, the Aurora's Edge documented the final sequences, careful to preserve every pulse and pattern. Scientists back on Earth would marvel at the discovery for years to come. But for Elena and Kale, the real revelation was personal. The universe had shown them that understanding and love could exist even in silence, in the spaces between what was said and what was felt. At night, they often stood together on the observation deck, looking at the crystalline clusters below. Sometimes Kale would brush Elena's hand with his own. Sometimes she would rest her head lightly against his shoulder. No words were necessary. Their bond had grown beyond them, shaped by trust, respect, and the subtle recognition of shared human experience. One evening, as the Aurora's Edge prepared to leave orbit, Elena looked out at the stars and whispered, "We'll carry this with us always, the understanding, the connection, everything." Kale squeezed her hand gently. "Always," he echoed. The ship moved forward into the uncharted expanse of space, the alien crystals fading behind them. But the resonance of what they had discovered, both with the alien intelligence and with each other, remained, a quiet, enduring melody in the spaces between their hearts. Elena and Kale stood together, side by side, the universe stretching endlessly before them. They had ventured into the unknown, and in doing so, had found something beyond discovery, a shared understanding, a connection deeper than words and the subtle, luminous spark of love. And in that vast, silent expanse, they realized the truth that humans had always known: connection, empathy, and the courage to feel made them extraordinary. The universe was infinite, But so was the capacity for understanding. And sometimes the most powerful discoveries were not the ones that could be measured or cataloged. They were the ones that could be felt, silently, in the spaces between what was said and what was truly meant. As the Aurora's edge sailed toward new stars, Elena and Cale faced the endless possibilities of the cosmos together, hearts aligned, minds attuned, and a quiet love thriving in the spaces between words.